We are live, I believe.
Yes, it says we are live.
Okay, awesome. Well, we will get started. Thank you all for joining us for our Water Protectors series, episode 4, Finding Your Voice and Getting Involved. I am Star Gibbons. I am the youth coordinator for Save California Salmon. Today, we'll be highlighting the Finding Your Voice and Getting Involved portion of the Water Protectors series. Our goal for this episode is to spread awareness, share information, and discuss how we can get involved and advocate for our water. In the previous episodes, we have discussed some of those current threats, water policy, and public comment, which we will link in the comments for anyone who have missed them. Our rivers and waters will continue to be under threat, and many have stood together to push back for those never-ending threats to divert, dam, and take our water. In these efforts, we have accomplished huge feats and suffered big drawbacks, but have remained a force to be recognized. To see a brighter future for our people, we have to continue to advocate and take action against the current threats and future threats to our waters, such as the Sites Reservoir and Delta tunnels. We must stand together, get involved, and share our knowledge and desire to see change for a brighter future. With that, I would like to introduce 2 water advocates who have made and continue to make a difference in their communities and work towards a brighter future. I'm honored to introduce Cultural Fire Management Director Margot Robbins and the Rios to Rivers Director of Development and Community Relations, Danielle Frank. With that, I would like to give them a moment to introduce themselves. Go ahead, Margot.
Ayakui Nicknow, Margot Robbins. I come from the traditional Yurok village of Morik along the Klamath River. I am very happy to be here. In addition to being a water protector, I am the co-founder and executive director of the Cultural Fire Management Council, co-lead and advisor for the Indigenous Peoples Network. I would just like to quickly say that fire and water have a very close relationship. Thank you for having me.
All right, Danielle.
Awesome. Thanks, Star. Hey, Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Frank. I am from the Hoopa and Yurok tribes in Northern California, and I am the Director of Development and Community Relations at Rios to Rivers. I also worked at SES for about 5 years and SES has a really special place in my heart. So really excited to be here today. Feels a little bit like old times with new faces. So really excited about that. And yeah, I would say this is a piece of work that I'm really passionate about. I learned a lot about water advocacy and policy when I was in high school through the Hoopa High Water Protectors Club, which Margot helped a ton with, and through work with SES as an intern and the youth coordinator. So I'm really excited to share kind of what I learned and about some of the work that I'm doing with youth now.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate you being here with us today. And we would like to begin with a short video focused on public comment. And from there, we will jump into questions for our presenters and ask a few questions and then about activism and advocacy. And then we're going to give an opportunity for anybody who has questions or would like to ask questions to drop those questions in the Q&A. So with that, we will pop this video on. Regina, do you want to do that?
Yes.
Series.
Sorry, I'm going to start over.
Hey, I'm Hamalio, and welcome to the Save California Salmon Youth Advocacy Series. I am Limoni Hutt, Save California Salmon Youth Intern and member of the Hoopa Tribe. This series focuses on how to be an environmental advocate in your community and is relevant regardless of whether you're just getting started or a long-time advocate that just wants to learn more. The first time I did a public testimony to the California State Water Board, I was just 8 years old. I have been speaking at these public comments ever since. This is to say that anyone can give a public testimony, no matter your age, experience, or educational background. California State Water Board meetings are open for the purpose of hearing from the general public, including you. Being a member of the community is the only and the best qualification needed. Okay, so to start, usually you must register for your public testimony in advance. After signing up, you will receive a number. This will be the number they call when it is your time to speak, which is usually shortly after the briefing. Most of the public testimonies I gave were over Zoom, but they can also be in person. Either way, your presentation will be in front of the California State Water Board alongside other community members who are also testifying or listening in. Also, if speaking in public is too frightening, you may also send in a letter instead of speaking in a public setting. Testifying is a matter of finding what is most comfortable for you. Now, I would like to go over a general outline on how to write a public testimony. Start by introducing yourself. Then, address the issue and the purpose of the speech by noting the meeting's topic and how it is negatively or positively impacting the environment and/or community. Then state the action you are in favor of. To add heart to your speech, include why this subject is important to you. This can be done by bringing in a personal story related to the issue and subject of the speech. Talk about how the issue affects your family, culture, or the community. This will help the board to see the overall personal and societal significance of your testimony. By adding heart, you are making your statement a reliable and relevant source because it shows that you have firsthand experience and are affected by the agenda topic. Also, this allows for the board to see the situation from your point of view and hopefully draws out sympathy or empathy. Most importantly, it puts a long-term perspective on the situation, and it begins to make people think about what effect this decision will have on the future community members. If possible, outline how multiple communities will be impacted by the board's proposed project or action. In the case of the removal of the Klamath dams, it is important to say that disruption of salmon runs will destroy tribal culture, fishing economy, and ecotourism in many towns along the Klamath and Trinity rivers. To close out your testimony, circle back to the beginning by restating the purpose, much like you would write a conclusion for an essay. Finally, include what you hope to gain by addressing the benefits of properly fixing or addressing the issue. Share how the lack of action has caused personal harm and cannot be continued. Remember that there's usually a time limit, so be sure to be as direct and to the point as possible. This can be done by practicing and timing your speech beforehand, which will help you feel more confident when testifying. These are a few pointers that I have to help you write a powerful public testimony. I would like to acknowledge that speaking and writing speeches for public testimonies is a learning curve, and it's more than okay to make mistakes. I try to encourage everyone to show up and speak. It doesn't matter how great your testimony is. What matters is that you're there and the board can see how many people care. In the next video, I'll discuss ways in which non-Native allies can support Native spaces and advocacy work. Thank you for listening to video 3 of Youth Activism for the Environment and Indigenous Peoples' Rights by me, Leilani Hutt, Save California Salmon Youth Intern.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that kind of gives a quick rundown of how to do public comment, and we'll talk more about it throughout our questions. So with that, we will get started. Our first question for our panelists or our presenters, how would you describe activism and advocacy? Do you want to go first, Margot? Mom?
Yes, thank you. So activism and advocacy are so critically important in moving controversial issues forward that if we don't stand up and let our voices be heard, then we have no say and little hope of things coming out the way that we want them to. As Native people, we have a specific point of view that is different from the larger world. And other people have very little understanding of our worldview and why the environment is so critically important to us, why it's so critically important that we have clean rivers. The rivers are like our bloodline, our blood running through our body. The rivers are the blood running over the earth, which goes through the places that we steward and have stewarded for thousands of years. So activism, the base word is act. It basically means to do something, to act on it. Don't just sit around thinking, oh, that's a terrible thing. Let your voice be heard. And there's many different ways to do that. You can speak it out at hearings. You can speak it out to your friends. You can go to hearings and give formal testimony. You can, if you're an artist, do artwork to represent it. If you are a person that likes to write, you can write opinion pieces in the newspapers. There's so many ways to be an activist, to be part of a movement, to change something, to advocate for an action that you believe in. It has taken many different kinds of activists to take the dams down, to bring fire back. There's not just one way to do it. But the most important thing is to show up, to be there. Let your thoughts be heard in some kind of way that fits who you are and gets the point across that you want to have the world to know, like how their actions are affecting you personally, and then to broaden that out too, so that you are connecting them to it, so that they understand that it's not just you personally or you as a tribal group or tribal people, but how it affects them as well. In terms of water, everybody needs clean water to drink. So it affects everybody. So as you engage in your in getting your voice out there, think personally, but also think globally.
Awesome, thank you. Danielle, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. Margot taught me a lot about activism and advocacy, so I agree with everything she says. And it's something I spew to my kids quite often that I work with. And I think the one thing that I always try and remind them and think about is it's not always easy to be able to go in front of strangers and feel like we're like asking for what is a human right, for clean water sources, for the opportunity to engage with our own land, for the opportunity to provide cleaner and healthier water for our entire state and our entire region. And when we talk about activism and advocacy in our leadership courses at Rios to Rivers, we talk a lot about the different ways that it can look. And public comment and like speaking on policy is such an important piece of activism and advocacy, because oftentimes we have these decision makers, these political leaders, and these decision making entities who, like Margot said, have no idea about our way of life or really what's important to us. A lot of the legislation and policy that have positively affected our region and many others was pretty much written by our own people and signed by a decision maker. And so that's something that I always think about is these decision makers and these folks that we're going to speak to, oftentimes they don't actually have the solution. They don't have all the tools and all the pieces that they need in order to write the right legislation or make sure that the policies are correct in how they're going to affect us or our region. And so by being able to go have these conversations with them through public comment, through direct meetings, through, protests, it's able to help them understand what needs to happen in order to write this legislation into place to protect our rivers, to protect our people, and protect our future. And so I think that's something that, growing up in Native communities, it's no secret that there's an interesting relationship with the federal government and other decision-making entities, to say the least. And there's definitely some historical mistrust there, but there is an opportunity for us to work together many times by, providing this information, because either way that legislation is going to get written, either way these policies are going to affect our communities and our people. We can make sure that we're doing our best to ensure it's in a positive manner, but because if we don't, then it's going to affect us in a negative manner. And there's nothing that we can do about that. And they're going to say, we provided the opportunity for you to come share. We did outreach, even if they didn't. And, there's going to be like we missed our opportunity to say something. And that does negatively affect us. And so I think just activism and advocacy is all about knowing which systems you're engaging with, how you want to engage with them, and what solutions you're looking to come out of it. Because, like I said, oftentimes all of the solutions for our region are driven by our people. And so being able to provide those comments and provide that necessary context and information, that's how we get decision makers to fight for us. They don't do it on their own, they need our help. And that's something that I've learned through my years of activism and advocacy.
Great, thank you. And so then our next question is, and I know that it's people are really unsure with, when can I get involved, or at what point, or does my voice really matter, those younger voices. And so with that, how and when did you begin to engage in activism and advocacy?
Let's
We'll
let
start with
Danielle
Danielle.
start this one. How about?
Yeah, we'll let you start.
Okay. I got that. Great. Well, I think it's so interesting because for a lot of Native people and communities, we don't necessarily see ourselves as activists when we're going to talk to people about the health of our waters, right? It's just like this inherent responsibility that we have to be able to go and speak on behalf of the river. It's something our people have done since before activism was really coined as a term. And so, I think my greatest, like when I first kind of started seeing myself in that realm, I was in the seventh grade. I was about 11 years old, and we were fighting a liquid natural gas pipeline up in Oregon. And I was going to Hoopa Elementary, where Margot was the director of Indian education, and there was an opportunity for students to be able to go to like this protest and to this meeting with the folks who were putting the liquid natural gas line into communities. They were having a meeting about how this was going to affect people. Oftentimes, there's some greenwashing done by these, corporations who are looking for profits. And so they were trying to lay everything on really lightly about the negative effects this was going to have. And so our opportunity was to help the community understand what would actually happen if this project went into place. So Margot loaded a bunch of us up from Hoopa L and drove us up to Oregon. And we got to go to protests. We got to go to this meeting and talk to the people about the negative effects this was going to have, about how it wasn't right that they were lying to people in a sense. And we got to, like talk to the broader public about what this actually meant. And it was my first kind of um, like public activism stance, and it really opened my eyes to like how important our voices are in these rooms. I wasn't even aware that these corporations were able to go into communities and tell them it was going to bring money, it was going to bring jobs, it was going to bring all of these good things. And they were not talking about how it was going to poison the water, how they were using eminent domain to take people's land once again. They weren't discussing the negative impacts. And so that was my first like big moment when I was about 11. And then I hung out with Margot for quite a few years doing different things, speaking at different engagements on behalf of the dam removal, against pipelines, for, better environmental education within our schools. And it really opened my eyes to the fact it was almost like people didn't necessarily know that a kid would know these things. They didn't, and it is true, you know, a lot of times like we're supposed to be out playing outdoors and we're supposed to be like doing our homework, but we're having to really think about the future of our entire community from the time that we can necessarily start understanding it. And so I think that opened a lot of people's eyes, just having kind of kids in the space who are educated on like, wow, these are really big issues. I think about how they're going to affect me, but these kids have to think about like how they're going to infect their entire lives and how this is something they're going to be fighting and thinking about for the rest of their time and what comes after that. Because as Native people, we always think about like what comes next. And I know that I dealt with a lot of hard stuff when I was younger on the res and dealing with other things because we didn't have access to like everything that is supposed to make us happy and healthy all the time. And it really, you know, there's a lot of interconnection between struggles our communities face and the struggles our lands face. And so, yeah, I've been doing activism and advocacy for I think a little over 10 years now, I would say. And I've seen people do it even younger. You know, it's really about just being able to share what these things mean to you and why they're important. You don't always have to know the science behind it, as long as you can speak to like why we should be protecting these things. And anybody can do that. I've seen kids who are 6 years old out there talking to, you know, decision makers about why they want to see fish in their river when they're older. And that hits really close to home.
And do you want to add to that, Mom?
Yes, it was so cool going to the celebration of the breaking down the dams and to see 3 generations of people who have been actively fighting to make that happen. So activists raise activists. My kids have been part of the activist movement since they was babies, you know, pushing them around in strollers, and then they're big enough to hold the signs and to understand that they're trying to destroy our water, or, you know, what the issue that's at hand. And I think it's really important for people to see those multiple generations, because a lot of people don't think about what it is we're going to leave to the generations after us until they see the young kids out there with their parents being actively engaged in fighting the good fight to make sure that our kids, our grandkids, all the generations after us have a livable world. They have a clean water to drink, places, swimming holes to swim in, you know, all of those things that we had as kids. In terms of timing, there are certain times of the intervention process when you are trying to sway decision making in policy or projects that are moving forward. And generally speaking, the sooner you engage in the process, the more chance you have for success of having an an outcome that is favorable to you. So once you get involved in it early and start educating people about the effects of the project, the easier it is for them to reverse course. If they already have millions and millions of dollars into the project and it's already started moving forward, it's not impossible to change its course, but it's a lot harder. So it's really important to get in right at the beginning. As soon as you hear about an issue that could concern you negatively, then to get involved and start educating other people about what's going on. There are certain hearings that have to take place to get public input. And so you want to be sure to find out when those hearings are so you know when to show up. And Save California Salmon is really good at educating the public about when these different hearings are taking place and where they're taking place so that the public can get involved in that. Again, it's really important to have youth voice in it. The youth are really powerful in swaying public opinion. It's also really important to try to get a diverse group of people who are supporting the stance that you have in trying to impact the way the decision is going to go. If you have a diverse group of people, then you can relate to a more diverse group of people. So that's also important. The more voices that they hear, the more people that they hear, the better. And it's always a good thing to get in there early.
Well, thank you. Yes, and two of those projects that are happening now that we are really trying to voice our opinions and concerns about is the Bay Delta and the Sites Reservoir Plan. That those are two projects happening now that we are really trying to raise awareness for, and we will put the link in the chat to about some of that information on those. And to add to that, and I've heard this phrase over and over, it's harder to remove something that's already in place than to stop something that hasn't already happened yet. So that's why we want to, stop these projects from happening before, and then instead of having to advocate to have them removed. So with that, we will go to question number 3. What do you think are the biggest challenges getting the community involved and informed? And we'll have you start this one, Margot.
So I think one of the biggest challenges in getting communities involved is that people are really busy. They are really busy almost all the time. And so it's challenging to get them to do something extra. I think another challenge is finding out the best way to inform people about what's going on and getting them to get in that emotional response so they don't just hear about it and then they go on with their day. I remember when I went into the high school class to Regina and I to talk to the high school students about the LNG pipeline, and they're high school students and they all want to be on their phones and all this stuff. And so the first thing I did was have them put their phones away. And so I don't have to compete with that. And then, I started talking to them at a level that they would be interested in. We live on the river. Most kids go swimming. Imagine if you went out and one day there was no water, or the water was so terrible it made you sick, which was happening at the time. So getting the community involved has some really tough challenges. I think some of the ways to meet those challenges is to find multiple different avenues of connecting with people to get your message across, because different people have different ways that they learn about things or hear about things. So, for like teenagers, we have to ask the teenagers what all social media stuff that they're using, and then get other teenagers to get the message out to them. When we first started the Water Protectors Club at Hoopa High, the students themselves planned and implemented a community education dinner. And they did all of the planning, right down to what the food that was going to be served and who was going to cover what parts of the topics. So when you're wanting to get the community engaged, it's important to give them concrete ideas and suggestions of how they can be involved. So all of the students, they come up with the different things that's how they was going to be involved. And then the community was involved by showing up. So showing up to a place is being involved. But there's lots of other ways to be involved too. The social media, if you have a big following, which a lot of people do, they have, over 1,000 people. If you can get 1,000 people sending out a message to 1,000 people, I mean, you can get things to trend. That's huge. That's huge. And they don't even have to leave their house and come to a meeting. And then there's those, who are good and practice at doing public speaking, and they, might have the time to, or be willing to make the time to go to the hearings and stand up and give their 3-minute spiel on the topic at hand, whether it is the Sites Reservoir, the Bay Delta, or any numerous other threats we have against our natural landscapes. And then there's the people who will show up for protests. Maybe they're kind of shy, but they don't mind blending in with the big old group of people marching around the Board of Reclamation, telling them what the needs of the river and the fish are. So there's lots of different ways for people to get involved, and to get them to be involved. We need multiple ways of communicating what the issue is, and multiple ways that they can be involved with it.
And Danielle?
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges in getting people informed and involved, like Margot said, is finding the right way to teach them about the subject. It feels really hard to go talk to decision makers about something specific if you don't know the ins and outs of it. And it takes a long time to know the ins and outs. A lot of our people are, they're working for the tribe, they're working for Caltrans, they have really busy lives, they're taking care of their kids, trying to find time to go fishing. They don't necessarily always have the time to, to learn about a topic for hours and hours and feel informed enough to go and have an educated opinion. And so, like Margot said, that community dinner we put on in high school, we have one of those at Rios to Rivers probably like once a month these days. We get together and we share food a lot, and we talk about the decisions that are going on that are affecting our territories. We talk about, the things that are going on that are affecting our kids, our future water protectors, and what we can do about them. And I think that that's something that our community loves to gather. We love to get together and talk to each other. We love to see each other. We love to see each other doing good and not just doing bad. And it's hard to find that balance of having these discussions around this could have really bad implications. This could be really bad for us. This is we have to fight. We have to fight. We've been fighting since the beginning of colonization. So it's really hard sometimes to get together and just talk about fighting. And so something that I've really worked on, and I think has helped solve that challenge a little bit for us, is we try to talk about the fight that we're in and all of the things that we have to do to protect our people and our place moving forward. But we also always talk about the good things that are happening. We have amazing young people in our communities. We have amazing families. We have amazing grandparents. And so it's, amazing parents, amazing everything, beautiful rivers. And so I think that's our balance and how we have found the most success in getting people informed and involved is creating spaces where we can gather, where we can share a meal, and we can discuss all of the things that will and can negatively affect our territories and our people. But also we can talk about the good things that we have going on. Because I know as Native people, we don't always get enough time to celebrate, and we don't always get enough time to talk about the families that we have and the amazing things that we get to do, spend our lives doing. And so we try to balance that of we have these things that bring us hope. And I think that that's kind of a central theme for us is sometimes people don't feel very hopeful when you're talking about like these decisions that are happening. I mean, we've been fighting the Delta Bay project since I was like 12 years old. And, it's a decade later and we're still fighting it. And sometimes the hope can feel a little bit diminished in those fights. But then when you bring our young people and they're fired up and they're ready to learn everything and go fight for another 10 years, it's a reminder that it all evens out, and that, we're all about balance, as high dance people. That's what we try to do, is bring balance. And that's what we try to do when we're informing and engaging people, is we have these good things to fight for, and that's why we fight. And we're lucky to be able to have that and to be able to do that. The fight is not always easy, but it's worth it. And I think that's a reminder that even I need sometimes, and a good reminder that I get from the kids that I work with quite often.
Awesome, thank you. And so our next question was kind of similar with, what are some ways to get involved? Which I feel like you guys covered, community dinners and hearings, protests, public comments, social media. We find it super helpful, and just good positive spaces to share that space. And to kind of just comment on your what you were saying, Danielle. I think it's, with this dam removal for the Klamath River, it took a really long time and a lot of people to continue to fight and generations to do that. And it took a long time for that to happen. And now we're in a time where that's actually happening. Those dams have been removed. And so it's really positive and inspiring that we can make change. And sometimes it's going to take a really long time and it's going to take a lot of hard work. But if we continue to work together, we can see positive change. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to do that with this Sites Reservoir and Bay Delta plan. And so I super appreciate you guys talking about that. So I will jump on to the next question. How do you prepare for, so in your comments, how do you get involved, is one of them was the public comment. So could you share a little bit of information on how you prepare for a public comment?
Yeah, I can start this one out and
Okay.
pass over to Margot. Yeah, I think the video that Leimonie made gives a really good step-by-step, and I was really excited when those came out. Because what I always do is my first move is like trying to educate myself on what we're discussing. I want to know the implications. I want to know the specific negative effects it will have on me and my community. I want to know the negative effects it will have on California as a whole, especially when we're talking to like the California Water Board. They're all about how this affects the most people and the biggest region. And so I like to know those specifics around what can I specifically speak to, and then what can I also, show that it's going to affect the entire state or the entire region in this way. And so I read a lot about the project, and I make sure that I'm reading from good sources. SES is an amazing one. There's also a few others that work with SES, and they tell the truth. And the hard part is a lot of times these entities who are trying to implement the projects, they're not always telling the full truth. They do a lot of greenwashing. They do a lot of, they talk a lot about the positive impacts or the fake positive impacts. They don't always tell the whole truth. And so I do my best to read and, watch videos and become aware of what it is I'm about to speak to, and make sure that I'm reading from the right sources who are coming from the same stance as me. This is bad for me because, and that's something I always try to like, because this, because that. And then once I feel like I have the right information, I'm able to, find out when the next opportunity for me to get involved is. Check SES's Instagram or the newsletters. They always have all the information about when these hearings are happening. They're dropping the water board calendar in the chat now. These are all ways that you can find out when the next time to get involved is. And so that's kind of my steps is what am I going to speak to? What do I know and what can I know? When's the next time for me to be able to share, and what does that look like? And then I kind of, I always practice my timing too. I'm a yapper. I like to talk, especially when it comes to something I care about a lot. And so I always try to be like, okay, I got 3 minutes. I need to fit this in 3 minutes. I need to fit, I don't need to tell them my whole life story. They just need to understand why this means so much to me. And I can do that in 30 seconds. And then I can do 30 seconds of like the negative impacts this will have on my community, 30 seconds on the negative impacts this will have for the state, and I can spend a minute and a half talking about the solution. The solution is not to put this project into place. It's to, you know, really think about the communities and put clean water and healthy communities over profits, which is something a lot of our entities have an issue with, and, you know, kind of provide that. One tip I always think about now that I'm like older and a little bit more educated on these topics is trying to provide that form of solution. And even if the solution is so much as don't do projects like this, you know, think about communities before you think about the dollar signs coming out of it. Like I may not have the exact solution to provide the energy they're looking to replace, but I can say like we live in a capitalistic system that doesn't work and isn't working, and we need to reevaluate like our priorities, and that's what you guys need to do. That's your solution. And so that's kind of how I prepare, get educated, get involved, and like be able to make sure I have time to say what I need to say. And there's always emails. You can always follow up. I do oftentimes follow up with a letter after my 3-minute talk because there's always so much to be said.
All right, would you like to add to that, Mom?
Wow. You are so amazing, Danielle. It's hit the nail on the head. I'm just like, yeah, I don't know that there's really anything to add to that. So I do the same, kind of thing where you make sure that you are well educated on what it is they're proposing and how it will affect me and the community and others. I try to do a mix of me personally as well as the larger population. Yeah, I think you just wrapped it up perfectly, Danielle.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. And I find too that it's just a lot of like, a hardship that I'm finding is that people just don't know what's going on or don't know, you know, the threats that our waters are facing right now. And so I really appreciate you, you know, it's like we have to get informed. We have to know, like you know, we do care about these things, but we don't know what the threat is. And so that getting informed and then, you know, finding out what we can do and then taking action to make change. So that was really great. And to add to that, I just wanted to let everybody know in the chat, we will also include the how to get involved and how to make public comment videos. And so those links are in the chat, and we are also on YouTube under Save California Salmon. And so we will jump to the next question. Why do you think speaking at water hearings is important? And it's kind of piggybacks off that last one. Do you want to start, Mom?
Yes. So it's critically important to speak at public hearings because those hearings are often hosted by the permitting agency. And so they are getting input on whether or not to permit a project. And so it is the opportune time to educate them about how it will affect you and the community, and it goes on public record. And it also during that time, you can talk about ways that the project will potentially violate environmental statutes, which is very, very important because they always have to get an environmental compliance document complete. And so if you are making public comment, not only are you sharing information about how it's going to negatively affect you, you can also bring up in points of how it is violating environmental policy and law. So they have to take those things into consideration. And if they are hearing about it again and again and again, that could be the ammunition to sway their opinion. And the more people they're giving testimony, the better, because they see that it's lots of people that care about this issue.
And do you want to add to that, Danielle?
Yeah, I always think it's so great to be in space with Margot because I really did learn, coming into this, I learned so much from her, and sometimes I feel like, yeah, there's not a whole bunch to add. But I'll just say, yeah, I agree with everything. And I think it's again that piece of our decision makers don't always know our solutions. The people closest to the problems are often the people closest to the solutions. We're the ones who are driven to make the change for our grandkids, for our rivers, for our fish, for our families. The folks who are making these decisions oftentimes live in the middle of cities and they don't have access to the same like culture that we do. They don't understand like that we're watching our rivers die, that our kids are growing up without access to be who they're supposed to be. And so it feels like they're sometimes a little bit disconnected from the problem. So they're not going to sleep thinking about how to figure out the solution. They're not waking up thinking about the solution for this issue, and we are. And so that's why I think it's so important to be in front of them and to share these things with them, is because we are waking up and going to sleep thinking about these things. We are wanting to raise our kids in our home territories and our grandkids and hope that they have access to everything that makes them a river person. And so, yeah, I just think that they don't always have the knowledge, and the most of the time don't have the knowledge and education that we do. And that's why it's so important to go there and give them a small piece of that. Because at the end of the day, like I said, these policies are going to affect us. And like if we can share with them exactly how and why they shouldn't, it means a lot. And so we're equipped with that knowledge and with this life for a reason. And I think this is one of them, to be able to make sure that we have the right words and the right stance to protect our places.
Awesome. Yeah, that's I feel like there's always a lot of people at the hearing saying how these projects are so great and the good things they're gonna do, and we have to kind of really step in and let them know, hey, well, this also is going to affect us and hurt our communities, and so we always need people to step up and advocate for us in our area. So thank you for that. And we did have a comment in the Q&A. It's, how do you keep from feeling depressed and overwhelmed from the endless threats? Would you guys want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can start. I think the thing I work with I've always worked with, like, I'm young, but I still like work with kids younger than me. And I think that's what has always, like, I've never really felt the burnout because I've had all these kids around me, like, just fired up to like be on rivers and be around rivers and to like protect rivers. And they're like every day they like say something that gives me so much hope. Like I just think I can't imagine what it's like gonna be like in 20 years when they're all grown up and have their families and know like this is what affected us. I'm not gonna do this because I want to live a good healthy life. Like I really think the health of our community is through the future, like through our kids and watching them grow up into like healthy, happy humans. And I get to see a lot of that. And so yes, like I know about the fights, I engage in them. I'm working at a traveling high school right now, and the kids are in class, and I'm in here talking with y'all. And they're all like native kids, but I think that's where like my greatest reprieve is. Like the fights do feel plentiful. They're always there, especially nowadays. There's some really big threats right now to our communities. Seems like a new one comes out every day. And when I get overwhelmed, I get to go talk with all these young people who are just like, well, it's worth it, right? I was talking with one of my kids the other day, who's a senior in high school, and that's what she said. And she was like, but it's worth it. Like you just said, we get to have this life and we get to like live on rivers and we get to have all these experiences. And like, yeah, there's always a fight, but like, isn't it worth it? And I was like, yeah, like, let me go back to my computer right now. You're so right. Like everything is worth it. This makes it all worth it. You know what I mean? And so it's just those little reminders of why we do this. And I think that's the main thing that drives me is like, yeah, I don't know what I would have ended up doing with my life if I didn't get the opportunity to follow this path of protecting rivers, protecting our people, I feel like I live a really special, great life, and it's because of the experiences I had and people who led me towards them. And so that's my greatest joy is like it's a reminder that it is all worth it. And these young people that we're fighting for in our rivers are there's nothing more worth it in the world. You know, everybody's got to fight for something, and we have something really big to fight for. And I think that's how I like stay away from the burnout, the trauma of it all is like when it gets too much, just remind yourself of why you're doing it. If that means you miss one educational hearing to spend a day on the river, that might be what you need to do. That's activism in itself. You know, we weren't supposed to be alive hanging out enjoying our rivers, but we are. And that in itself is a form of resistance. So I think finding that balance, again, all about balance. But yeah, it's hard out here and reminding ourselves why we're fighting. I think that's the most important thing we can do.
Okay, did you want to add any, or should we move on?
Yes, I would like to add, I there is hope in numbers. We are not the only ones out there fighting for the river. There are lots and lots of other like-minded people who are doing right by our sides, doing the same thing. We are all have the same purpose, maybe not the same reasons, but the same purpose. And so you move forward on the things you can agree on, and you fight together with sometimes who may not always be your advocate. Maybe in some other situation, you know, it might not be so. But when it comes to clean rivers and good water, we will take our partners and move forward, and there are a lot of them. As Danielle said earlier, it's important to celebrate the successes, you know, and it's not just the end success where you get the outcome that you wanted. There's successes along the way, you know. Oh, we had 200 people show up for that hearing, you know. We had they added an extra hearing in our area. Remember that, Danielle? They hadn't planned on having a hearing in our area, but upon a request of the youth, Daniel included, they did. And so there are successes along the way. You know, you have a community education dinner, 50 people showed up. The food was great. They all got educated. Those are all successes. So you have to celebrate those all along the way, and just kind of really take enjoyment in the people who are there fighting the good fight with you. You know, it's how you feed your warrior spirit, hanging out with like-minded people. And you know, there is so much hope when you look at it from those directions. And for me, there's just a lot of hope because I believe in the power of prayer. And that's big. That's big. So yes, there's lots of places, lots of things to be hopeful about.
Awesome, thank you. So that will jump back into some of the questions about public comment. And I just wanted to really emphasize the importance of public comment and what it can do. And they always have times for people to come in and talk openly for about 3 minutes. And that being said, can you share some examples of how to make effective public comments at these water board hearings? And we'll have Danielle answer that first.
Yeah, I can start. One of the greatest examples that I can share is when I was in high school with the Water Protectors Club, again with Margot and Billy Sanderson, a good friend of ours. We went down to Sacramento from Hoopa High, loaded up the school van again, and headed down to the state capitol where they were having all the water board hearings at the time. And we, you know, talked about like how hard it was to get there. Like, let alone, you know, we were talking about the health of the Trinity River and how the Bay Delta project was going to affect us and our river, and we weren't even on the list of people affected, and how, you know, these were damages that we needed to come shed some light on. But getting there was difficult. You know, we were missing 2 days of school, which none of us complained about, but it was a thing our teachers did. And it was a 5 hour drive down. It was it was a night in a hotel. It was a 5 hour drive back up. And collectively, I believe that we had about 6, 7 people with us. We got about 30 minutes of their time. You know, we spent these we spent literal days getting to be in front of them for less than 30 minutes of their time. And so that was something that we highlighted. You know, we in our 3 minutes, we actually had some folks give up their 3 minutes to us so that we had a little bit more time to talk about all the issues and the ways this was going to affect us and our rivers, but also the accessibility difficulties. Like if we weren't there with the school, we wouldn't have been there. Our parents were working, our families were working. They were not driving us 10 hours in 2 days for something, even though they knew it was really important. That's just not, and like, that's not we don't have the resources available to do that. And so, that was something we chatted a lot about, and we worked it into our public comment of like, hey, we don't have 10 hours round, like, we don't have time for a 10-hour round trip for 3 of your minutes. You know, we're fighting with limited resources, and they ended up giving us a hearing in Reading, which, you know, is about little over 2 hours closer to our community. And we like co-hosted like the largest water board hearing in California. We had the building full, we had a stage outside full, we had protesters on the streets, and we had like 9 tribes coming together. And it wasn't like people were singing songs, people were sharing their lives, people were sharing stories. You know, outside you weren't limited to 3 minutes. And we were able to, of course, like the that might have been the longest water board meeting they ever had. They were sitting there for hours listening to people with the same perspective. And then outside, the public was listening to people remind us about that hope, remind us what we were fighting for. And so we met all these goals all at once. And that's what I think is, you know, that's how you provide a good comment. Like that time we had a very specific ask, like, you come to us, like, for once you pack up your stuff and you come to us and you see how much work that is. And they did, and we had an amazing outcome. And now they come to Blue Lake, they come to Wairika. You know, they're basically in the mountains these days. And I think that that was a really good example of we shared about the issues specifically that we were there to talk about, but we also had an ask, come to us, and now they do. And so I think that's it's still one of the events that I'm like, we did that. Like, you know, we worked together and we really did that, and they listened.
That's awesome. Mom, would you like to add to that?
I think between the opening video and Danielle's comments, that's perfect.
It really was very inspiring and really inspires hope, which is awesome. And with that, we are running a little low on time, so I'm going to skip to this bottom one. If you guys just want to add a few brief answers for it, it's what would you like to share with those out there who are unsure on how to make a difference and be an advocate for their community and resources? And I'll have you start, Mom.
How to make a difference. I think the first piece of knowing how to make a difference is educating yourself on what the issues are, specifically at this point, the Bay Delta and Sites Reservoir, which will affect the Trinity and Klamath Rivers, as well as other waterways as well. Save California Salmon has some great resources to really pinpoint all that information. And I always like the bullet point information, so that, you know, you don't have to read pages and pages and pages. It is an abbreviated bullet point version of all the most important information. People can share that information in their social media streams, you know, depending on what kind of interests and time you have. There's lots of different ways. Of course, going to those hearings is always important. we're at a really critical time now in this process, and things are starting to look more than a little scary. So the more people that know about what's going on, the better. There is, as mentioned earlier, there's different ways to do public comment. Those are the things that I can think of offhand.
Yeah,
did
and I'll
not-
just add like, yeah, a quick everything that Margot said, and talking to your young people about this, you know what I mean? If your kids, if you're a teacher talking to your class, your grandkids, I think we're never too young to understand that we're still fighting for our rights. And so just, talk and educating yourself first and foremost, and then being able to share that education with your kids, your nieces, your grandkids, your friends, people who maybe don't even have the same stance as you, sharing why you do. Sometimes we have to get beyond preaching to people who believe the same as us and telling people who don't always believe the same as us why we believe these things and hoping it can make a difference. And so like I just think these conversations should be very mainstream. We talk about problems all the time, and I think we can do better about talking about like solutions and the way we make change. And so I try to do that a lot, is not just talk about all the things that are coming, but like, here's what I'm going to do about them. I'm going to read this paper. I'm going to share this post. I'm going to talk to my friends. I'm going to go to this hearing. And it's the smallest things, like, I'm going to make a $10 donation to this organization who I know is doing really good work. Like, it's all these little things that add up to allow the bigger things to happen. So that's kind of the only thing I would add is, normalizing these conversations. It's not a big political thing to talk about protecting rivers. It's something that we should all do more of.
Awesome, thank you. Well, with that, I want to thank you both. We super appreciate you guys spending your time here today to share information, and super appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing and continue to do. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Regina, our Save California 7 director, and she was going to highlight some action alerts for us really quick, and we'll wrap it up. Regina?
Yeah, I actually have a slide, but I don't know if I can, let me see if I can share it real quick. Okay, gosh, I might not, I'll just keep it on here to remind myself. But yeah, there are a bunch of things coming up. I'm sure a lot of people probably know that there is the Bay Delta Plan that's going on, and that's going to decide what flows are in the Sacramento River system, but also impacts the Trinity River. And there will be hearings coming up about that soon. But currently, there are hearings coming up about the Scott and Shasta Rivers in-stream flow processes, and in-stream flow processes on the Upper Sacramento. And I think it's May 5th, there will be a water board meeting for the State Water Board in Wairika, and we will be sharing more information about that. But that'll be based on these pollution plans. And right now there are pollution plans that are being written for the Scott and Shasta Rivers and for the Smith River. And both of those will have upcoming hearings. There's also hearings ongoing about racial equity action plans for the state of California, where we've been addressing a lot of these issues that Danielle brought up with making sure that the water boards actually come into our communities. And these pollution plans and flow plans and racial equity action plans are actually really positive processes that we can encourage, which is nice right now, because then the other things that are happening are there's going to be some hearings and process around the Trump biological opinion orders that say that agriculture should get all the water in California. And the main one that is coming up will be around the Trinity River flows process and biological opinions. And so that I'm just gonna leave it there because we have like a minute. There's obviously tons of things going on, but the next things will be this May 5th hearing for the Scott and Shasta River in Wairika, and we will post how to get involved online. Because of the work we've done, there's always opportunities to call in and do your comments too. And then the last thing I would say is that it's also really important for people like us that do lawsuits and then fight these things when they get to the courts, to show that people were involved and people expressed that they needed to get these things done. So yeah, that's all I have to share, and I will stop my screen sharing now, but definitely follow us on social media, watch these, and we do provide examples of people doing public comments and people doing media statements. And the more you practice, the less nervous you will be and the more effective you will become. Danielle is a great example of that.
Could I ask a quick question, Regina?
Yes.
For the waste discharge, is that connected to like the cows not being fenced off from the river and the fertilizer runoff also?
Yeah, there's two processes happening in the Scott and Shasta and other watersheds. The state decides what the flow processes are. So those are one set of hearings, and then there's the waste discharge requirement hearings. And that's like all chemical pollution, all cow pollution, all agricultural runoff. And right now there aren't waste discharge requirements or permits for any of the Scott and Shasta pollution, all of the Klamath pollution, and the Smith River pollution that happens from the lily bulb farming. So that's what these processes that are happening now, and there'll be hearings in May and October for both the Scott and Shasta hearings and for the Smith River lily bulb pollution hearings.
Thank you.
And you'll find that information on our social medias also. We share that, a lot of information on those. Well, awesome. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you guys coming out for our episode 4. And that will conclude our episode. Thank you.